This is CheloniaCast, episode 23. You can find us at theturtleroom.org/CheloniaCast, where you can learn more about our program and access the CheloniaCast Student Research Fund. Today, we're really excited. We're joined by Dr. Brian Horne, who is the Freshwater and Turtle and Tortoise Coordinator for WCS. Dr. Horne has done a variety of different conservation work and research in, I believe, six continents. He's done some really interesting things, and we're really excited to talk to him today. So thank you for coming on, Dr. Horne.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And don't worry about the doctor. Just call me Brian.
All right. That sounds good.
To get going here, we ask every guest this, but I mean, there's not really a better question to start this podcast. What first got you interested in turtles and tortoises?
I was thinking about that last night, and my short answer was growing up in rural Virginia, and we were driving in my father's yellow Volkswagen Squareback. It's a little station wagon with an air-cooled engine, and we stopped on a country road and picked up a box turtle. And I was very supported by my parents, and I had snakes and toads and lizards, and I had it all. Big backyard with box turtles because I could go out into the woods and find them, and I really enjoyed that. But also, one of the memories I resurfaced last night was I remember my neighbor. He was a construction worker, long history in the area, and he had gone trapping for snapping turtles, and I had never seen a big adult snapping turtle, and they were butchering them because they were going to eat them. And I remember there was one big female, and she had all these eggs inside her, and I was just like, whoa, what's this anatomy? So I got really interested in anatomy and trying to figure out turtle anatomy and understand how they breathe with with a shell, and how they're not having a diaphragm. So I got really interested in anatomy. But I think overall it was just growing up in a rural part of America where I could go out and catch painted turtles and really spend time in nature with them.
When you talk about anatomy, we've been spending some time dissecting a lot of turtles recently. So working with the Chelonian Research Institute collection out here in Ohio. So it's been pretty interesting, kind of a similarity there. We've had some time to kind of get to know the inside of a turtle pretty well. That's pretty interesting. One of the things, I know you're one of the on the board or steering committee for the IUCN TFTSG group. And that's a pretty interesting group. You work to, I mean, maybe you can give us a little bit of background on what you do there, or kind of what is the process for, and what is kind of the purpose of the group, right?
Yeah, I've been involved in the group for quite a while. It's based out of the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And the goal of the group is to really work on the red listing accounts. And the red list accounts are a status of how they're doing in the wild. How are all the turtle species doing in the wild? And there's a really in-depth system of categorizing the species. And the idea is that on a regular basis, we should be able to go through and catalog the turtles and determine their status, if they're critically endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, least concerned, or data deficient. And I served as a co-chair for 4 years a while back, and I go to a lot of the workshops, particularly the workshops in Asia, and that's when we get together a whole group of experts, and we talk about the current status of them. And a lot of people get a little confused because it's not just about the total number of turtles. That plays a part of it, but it's how they're declining over 2 generations, how much distribution they lost, what's the threat level. And one thing, just a slight aside, one thing that we as a community, turtle conservation community, struggle to do is really come up with real population estimates. We often study, I mean, when I say population, I mean total population across the species' entire distribution. We spend a lot of time just looking at studying one population here, one population there. But as the group moves forward, and one of the things I think we need to do better at, and this is perhaps where, smart, young, dedicated folks like y'all can help come up with a means for using new technologies to better estimate the total populations. Is it with environmental DNA? Is it with genetics? Is it with GIS? And how do you extrapolate that? Because, in the public eye, one of the things that we're falling behind with is counts. Talon, I'm on the phone. Shh. Talon, I'm on the phone. Sorry, my kids are home from school, and it's a Sunday morning. They're all watching cartoons.
It's okay. We're working virtually. That's part of the game.
So yeah, like if you look at elephants, people will tell you we've got this many elephants. If you look at tigers, people will tell you we have this many and how many we increased. And that's those concrete numbers like that really capture the general public. And all too often we spend time about being negative. And we use it way too much. Oh, turtles are the most endangered vertebrate group. No, it's the wrong message in my opinion. I think we really need to say is, look, comparatively, for the amount of money we spend on these megafaunas, we can save almost all the turtles. Because it's not as costly type of conservation and population recovery. I think we need to really change that narrative. And I'm sorry, this was a bit of a stray from the specialist group, and I don't want to take away from what the specialist group does. The specialist group is really about being an unbiased scientific authority for saying what is the status of a species. They're not a conservation proactive group. It's not what they do. They're not supposed to be going out and doing the conservation as the specialist group. Many of the individuals in the specialist group do conservation, and it's comprised a lot of that, but it's not a lobbying group. It's not an advocating group. It's supposed to be the unbiased scientific authority on what's the status of turtles. But as I see it, it's an extremely important job, and it's one that we're falling behind on. We have many turtles that are still data deficient. We have many turtles that haven't had their status update in a very long time. And part of that is often because we're all way too busy. It's a big task. It's a lot of work. And there's some bottlenecks that we need to get through. But if I had any message is that we need to refocus on that because so many of these statuses are out of date, sometimes 20 years or more. You're losing conservation funds that are so needed because unfortunately, and I'd like to talk about this later, is unfortunately so many conservation organizations only prioritize critically endangered and endangered species. And if you're not having an updated status and really telling the world what the turtles really are, then you're losing out on a lot of money. And species conservation is so incredibly difficult to fund. It's species focused dollars are tough to come up with, and it's really hard to raise those monies for those type of projects. It's much easier to say, okay, we're going to raise money for intact forest, or we're going to work on some of the other bigger projects, human wildlife conflict, wildlife disease, those sorts of things. Say, I want to study and save this one turtle on this one island. And, people are like, well, that's not a big enough impact for my dollars. So we really have to do a better job of messaging and not always focus on the negative and focus more on the positives and what can be done and how we can restore these populations for comparatively little amount of money compared to some of the other megafauna. I'm sorry, that was a little wandering.
No, that's pretty interesting. Like, I think that comes down to like basic human nature. If it's too negative and you're just presenting everything so
you're overwhelming them with negativity. People are just not going to want to be involved in that. They're going to just want to forget about it and put their money towards something that they feel is worth investing in.
Yeah. And people fund people. And, I think that's what's really great about like what you're doing is, you're putting this interaction with people. And when you have someone who's enthusiastic and dedicated and has that driving passion to make a difference, those are the individuals that are often most successful in raising funds to do the work, because people get excited about your positivity and your drive. And I think that's really important. And I think, if I had a message to young people, is to just, is to show people your drive. And I'm not talking about being like Steve Irwin and get out there and, being, an over the top personality, but if you can exchange your information and you can tell your point of view, your story in such a way, and why this is important to you and how you are impacting not only the turtles, the environment, the human communities, I think you'll have a much better chance of success.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, with the megafauna getting a lot of the funding, it is sort of unfortunate. I mean, that's good that happens, that we're conserving other species, but at the same rate, we were talking to a few weeks ago, Whit Gibbons. We had sort of a discussion about why turtles matter. And there's just this variety of different ways that they're really important. And if there was just some way to make that more clear to the general public, I feel like that there would be a lot more support just right up front for chelonians and chelonia conservation. But I think it's a good way that you sort of talk about the specialist group, but also put it into context, right, of why this is important and what are sort of the shortcomings and what are the things that are the reasons behind the status assessments we're looking at there. I think that's an interesting way to sort of describe that. Maybe I know that you've sort of done research and published some of the red list assessments for some species, and specifically in Asia. Maybe you could, was there anything sort of interesting that you found in looking through reports on species and something that was kind of shocking to you? Or
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, and this has been on my mind quite a bit lately, is that within Asia, Southeast Asia is primarily where I've been working. South Asia and Southeast Asia are where I've spent most of my time the past 15 plus years. Is that when we've been looking at all the turtles, hunting pressure is by far the number one reason for the decline of all species. And it's intense, because I don't think many people in the US who haven't had the chance to travel really understand the human density and how many humans are in those regions and what pressure they put on wildlife. Some of that has to do with poverty and the need for protein. Some of it has to do with just human greed, looking to make a buck. But when you look at the turtle populations, and we've looked at in so many of the species, you look at some of like the rare Cura from Vietnam, those turtles were hit really hard. And that was a lot for the pet trade and some for the food trade, some for the medicinal trade. And those populations shrank quickly, and they're very, very low. But you look at like some of like the snail eaters. Why is it that you can go into almost every market and find those? You see them for sale on the roadsides. You see them everywhere. And people are like, oh, they're just abundant. It's no problem. But the hunting pressure is extreme. Same with like lysimies, the little flapshell turtles. Huge hunting pressures. What is it about those turtles that enables them to withstand these extremely high hunting pressures? And I think there's a couple things. I think they mature very quickly. They grow very fast, and they're very highly fecund. They lay a lot of eggs each year. They probably start laying them at a very young age. So they're very unturtle-like in the classic very slow to mature, low fecundity type system. And going back to the snail eaters, we see a lot of those in confiscations. And one of the problems they have is this incredible bone rot. They get bruised and they get, the bone just dies. But when you look at the shell, talking about anatomy, when you look at it, it's a soft bone. It's not a hard bone. It's like they grow so fast and so quickly, they don't put a lot of bone down, and it's like a fine fruit that bruises easily. And I'm just would really like to dive into those and really kind of compare why or how they are so different. Because when I talk about hunting pressures, I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands harvested annually from small locations. So how can they sustain that? And I think that's a real interesting aspect, because when we start computing things like doing like population viability analysis, that's a tool, a mathematical tool for really trying to look at what parameters of the turtle's biology do we really need to focus on to recover this species. And we've been looking at there's really about 8 or 9 things that in our toolbox that we do for conservation. And one of the biggest, is reducing hunting. That's huge. But we also kind of stick to nest protection, head starting, some reintroductions. So there's kind of a small toolbox for species like one of the ones I work with, the big river terrapins. We've really been focusing on nest protection and head starting, because we're trying to get big turtles out to the water, because the mortality is really highest at the juvenile stage. Now with these snail eaters, they grow so quickly. They spend so little time in the juvenile stage. That they can withstand these pressures because they mature young and they lay a lot of eggs. Where like what we've seen with some of the river turtles, I mean, we've had some now for 15 years in captivity from hatchlings, and they're just starting to lay eggs. So they're really dependent on those adults not being harvested, not being killed. So those type of comparisons are really interesting, because when we're going back to looking at those red list assessments, you really have to look at the rate of decline, and you have to understand why they're declining, and kind of understand that will they continue to be declining, or are they under imminent threat of extinction? So those are some of the things that we've been looked at, is just trying to better understand turtle biology, because for years I've always heard a turtle is a turtle is a turtle, but no, really it's not. And some of these models that have been created have been really for temperate species, and we have not really had long-term studies on many of these tropical species. And the tropical species that tend to be studied are like the large river turtles, like the Potomimas in Brazil, the large river turtles. But we haven't really spent a lot of time studying some of the smaller turtles that seem such an unusual turtle biology. Again, because they're not critically endangered and they don't get the funds.
Yeah, it seems like there is a lot of. I'm working on a project with Western pond turtles and red-eared sliders, and looking at kind of competition, or I guess the potential for it. And in order to do this with the models that I'm using, you need to understand the carrying capacity for both species, which I think in ecology is something that's pretty important to know regardless. But it's pretty challenging to compute, but it seems to be lacking for a lot of turtle studies. And just like you're saying, it seems that maybe, right, the idea that a turtle is not the same thing when it comes to life history or generation times, or just kind of all aspects of its biology that will contribute to generating a population analysis, or like you said, a population viability analysis over time. It's certainly doable with a lot of species, but that data is just not there in a lot of cases. It's an interesting thing to think about, that maybe it's not as challenging as we think.
Yeah, what I was thinking, what you said about carrying capacity. I remember when I was starting my postdoc in India, that was some of the first questions the wildlife officials asked me: what's the carrying capacity? Because they worry about that a lot with tiger conservation, because it's so based on prey? Are there enough ungulates and wild hogs and other things for the tigers to eat? And they really look at, what's the prey in the area and how that impacts these large carnivore projects. But what I've seen, and I'm curious a lot, is this kind of shifting baseline in that, when I was a young child, I used to see a lot of painted turtles, and I would see these big populations, just incredible numbers. One of the crazy memories I have was a family vacation down to Florida, and we went to Cape Canaveral, and we stopped off at a river there, and I saw just unbelievable numbers of diamondback terrapins. It just blew my mind. They were just everywhere, and it was incredible. Now that was 40 plus years ago. And many people of your age, that's not available to see. You don't see these large populations. So when people see some turtles, they go, "Oh, are they at carrying capacity?" No, they're probably really, really reduced. Because if you read like some of Bates' stories and explorations up the Amazon, and he talks about populations of the giant Amazon river turtles and just the incredible diversity not diversity, but the just incredible numbers they saw. You look at some of the old records for nesting river terrapins in Malaysia, where they would have 40, 50,000, and we're so beyond. I mean, we're down to a couple hundred here and there in Malaysia, and it's still going down. So I think that's interesting for folks like yourselves who are entering college, and you're looking at turtle populations, and you're trying to study these big turtle populations, and you're trying to create these analyses and really look at population structures. I feel unfortunate that many of these populations are already really declined, and I think that will impact your perception on things. And I don't think we really know carrying capacity, because historically the densities for turtles have been astronomical, and we're nowhere near what they used to be. Way before my lifetime. If you read Roger Conant's autobiography, which is a great read if you haven't read that one. It's that big blue book that he wrote. It kind of looks like his old field guide. He talks about going to Real Foot Lake in Tennessee, and the number of turtles he saw there was just enormous, just absolutely enormous. And in that book, he laments that species aren't as abundant as they used to be. So I think that's just an interesting perspective, and one that maybe y'all can dive into with your careers.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting just to think about, right? That baseline maybe doesn't even exist in a lot of cases, and we have to really, even digging back through the literature can help with that kind of thing, though, in terms of estimating it. But I was reading one of the it was a PVA on Hydromedusa recently, and they kind of they used for all the juvenile life stage information to input and growth, the sort of sequential growth phases for different life stage of turtles. They just used work that had been done on painted turtles and applied it to the Hydromedusa, which I feel like is sort of not maybe a great thing to do, just in terms of the ecology. It's going to be very different, but kind of sort of a.
Was that Tectifera or Maximiliana?
I believe Tectifera. I actually was paying more attention to how they were doing the analysis than the species that they were analyzing, but I believe it was Tectifera.
Yeah, Tectifera and Maximiliana. I haven't seen Maximiliana. I've been to Brazil. I've been in the habitat, and I've looked for them, but I haven't found them yet. I hope to get back soon to really find those, because I mean, y'all are so lucky. You can just Google and find about every photo and of a turtle, and it's at your fingertips. I remember when I was in high school, finishing up high school before I went to college, I wanted to make a checklist of all the turtles, and I wanted to have photographs of every turtle species. And I remember buying my first digital camera, and it was on this big like tripod thing. It was massive. It was huge. And I think it was like, it was so ridiculously poor quality. But I was trying to get digital pictures, and that's when I had my first personal computer, and I was really trying to accumulate all of that. And I I dug through the literature and I wrote to so many people because I wanted to see a picture of Maximiliana and I hadn't seen one. So when I first saw my first photo, I was blown away.
They are really interesting turtles. Primitive looking, long necks. Doesn't get much better than that. But you mentioned river terrapins. Maybe we can, and I know that you've traveled quite extensively, and we like to sort of hear the adventure stories and such. And but maybe you could shed some light on your work in Southeast Asia. I know you've kind of focused a lot of your efforts there, and maybe just kind of your adventures there. What sort of work have you done?
Oh, well, I've been really lucky. After I finished my PhD, I went and did a postdoc with the San Diego Zoo. Um, I always dreamed about being a college professor, and that's what I thought I was gonna be, but it just didn't happen. I got really lucky with the job with after I finished my postdoc, I got hired by the Wildlife Conservation Society out of New York to help run some of their programs. But a lot of that is all dependent on this postdoc I did in India. And while I was working in India on the red crown roof turtle, I started going over to Myanmar and Cambodia and Malaysia, and I started really looking at the genus of Batagur. And one of the reasons I did was because this was in some of your questions that you sent over, was that you were asking about what are some of the biggest hurdles. It's capacity. There aren't a lot of people who had the opportunity to study turtles and develop the knowledge set about how to study them and be conservation champions. So a lot of my work was based just on building the capacity, and that was really enjoyable. And that's what I've been focusing on. And I got a little too good at it, and now I'm moving on, and I'm kind of letting go of some of the projects in Asia that I hold near and dear to my heart. Not letting go, but I don't have to go over as much because now there's people that are more than capable and are truly excelling at it. But some of the earlier days in India, when we were riding camels up and down the rivers looking for turtles' nest, and oh my gosh, I'm a big man to be on a camel. It just doesn't really work. But I had a great time doing that. India. I think I could write volumes trying to describe my experiences in India because it's so incredibly different. But where I worked was in this region in north central India, and it was long considered a lawless area because it's got all these ravines and hidden stuff, and there were a long history of bandits that lived in there. And it was hot. It was really, really hot, and there was lots of sand, and we had sandstorms, like true, real, like sandstorms that would come through. But I had to learn all the cultural differences. I learned, cultural dress. I learned cultural greetings. I made so many faux pas. I did so many things backwards. I embarrassed myself a bunch of times. And then, I'm thinking about Myanmar, and Myanmar is an incredible country. Unfortunately, right now it's going through an extremely bad time, but the people there are wonderful. And I've had a chance to go up into the upper Hukong River, and it's an area where they've created a lot of work because they were trying to develop this area for tiger conservation. And we would be out, and we were riding elephants, and we would be going way up into the areas, and I just going into these villages, and a lot of the villagers, had stories about from World War II, the last time they really had, Americans come through. I think a lot of Americans forget, how involved we were in Myanmar, then called Burma, how we were trying to build a road from India all the way across and into China. And that's called Stillwell's Road. It's an interesting historical aspect if you ever want to read about some history of World War II that's often glossed over. We were very, very involved in that. And I was in that region, and I was talking to a lot of people, and just the different cultures. Like, we would be out, and we were patrolling for poachers once, and they caught some guys who were trying to hunt tigers, and they had these homemade shotguns that were made from the main tube off a bicycle, like the one that goes from the seat to the handlebars, and just incredible stuff like that. And then they would have these crossbows, these handmade crossbows that were just so impressive. And they would go out and they were hunting some of the large bovids, and being out in the woods. And I just can't imagine, going up trying to hunt a tiger with a homemade shotgun. That just blows my mind. And then like Cambodia, that's a country that's really near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in Cambodia. The people are truly, truly wonderful. And you have to think about in Cambodia, they went through this horrible genocide, and, pretty much everyone of that age remembers it. And they've lost family members. They've lost, parents, brothers, sisters, cousins. So they have a very tight family unit because they lost so many of their families. The family is extraordinarily important. So when I would go and visit and they would treat me like family, I think that was pretty incredible. But I should be giving you guys turtle stories, not people stories.
No, it's interesting. It's just
oh gosh. That's that's an important part right there, is that a lot of my time in Southeast Asia is about the people, and because there aren't that many turtles, and this is important, and this is sort of what I was going back to with this shifting baseline, is that their populations of turtles are so low. So you're trying to build capacity. You're trying to teach people how to study turtles. And unfortunately, we can be out there for an incredibly long time, and we only see one or two river terrapins. We might get 3 or 4 nests a year. So think about that. Whereas you're in the United States, and you can say, oh, I can go out and study a turtle population, and I can be out there, and I can, over a course of a summer, say, I can see 100, more than 100. When I was working with map turtles for my master's, I was on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi, and I was seeing a lot of turtles, and those were, a state endangered species. The baseline has shifted so far that the turtles that we were studying are so rare that you don't get the opportunities to really see it. So one of the projects that I've been working on is kind of cross-pollinating within WCS. WCS has, we're in like 50 plus countries. I think maybe even 60 now. We're in a bunch of different countries, and we have turtle biologists primarily in Latin America, including Mexico, Central America, and South America. And then we have projects in South and Southeast Asia, into Indonesia, throughout the archipelagos and stuff. And the turtle populations are very different. I'm extraordinarily lucky that I've been able to spend a ton of time and seeing large turtle populations, big nesting of the giant Amazon River turtles. And then I come over and I talk to the folks in Asia, and they don't really see it because they've never seen those big populations. So a few years ago, I was able to bring a bunch of people over from Latin America over to Cambodia, and we had a workshop there because I wanted the people from Latin America to see what happens when populations crash and are very, very small, and you're really working on small population recovery, which is a vastly different thing from managing large populations. And I'm trying to raise money now to take a lot of the people from Asia over to Brazil and spend time in Brazil and looking at these large populations, because they've never seen this. They've never seen it. What happens when there's a large congregation of nesting species, because I think that helps put everything into perspective. It helps them understand the things like carrying capacity and what population levels are. And it also gives them a tool to aim for, but also it's just, maybe like 2 weeks, they would catch more turtles and see more turtles and handle more turtles and study more turtles than they might do an entire career, or maybe a couple decades or a decade or so, because the populations are just so low. So I think that's a perspective that has not really been addressed. And I think as we move forward with conservation, we really have to do that a bit better. But why I think like the meetings we have with when the Turtle Survival Alliance has its coast symposium with the specialist group, that's really become an opportunity for people around the world to see and share ideas and meet, and that's why that symposium is so important. And I see how that's really impacting global turtle conservation, because it's a chance for people to meet each other. And there's been a ton of folks now that have been like, "Oh, you're doing this really great work, and AJ, let me come on over and I'll spend some time with you." So there's more and more people now that are traveling abroad and spending time with developing these other projects, and I think that's just absolutely fantastic and very exciting. And I think it's directly related to the TSA symposiums that have been going on for the last 20 years. Sorry, I didn't give you the best turtle stories. I know this is being recorded, and I don't know how PG some of it is, so I don't want to get in trouble.
No, it's fine. We just want to hear whatever you want to say works.
Yeah.
anything good, but yeah,
I'm just thinking about some of the embarrassing stories of like, being in Indonesia, wading through these volcanic swamps and, asking, there's no saltwater crocodiles. There's no saltwater crocodiles. And they go, "Oh yeah, no problem, no problem." And then you spend a whole day out in the field, and then you're leaving, you see this big sign, "Danger, saltwater crocodiles,"
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking about like, I was in Northern Australia with my friend Sean Duty, and I was going down to see his project on the Daly River, where he was studying the pygmy softshell turtles. And I had always wanted to see those. Those were so cool, and I was just like, "What? They're so neat." So I flew down. I think it was in between my master's or PhD, or maybe it was summer between my I can't remember what it was. I flew down, and we were camping on the side of the river. And it was one of the first nights I was there, and I had to get up in the middle of the night to go pee, and I walk away from the tents, and I'm out there peeing, and I hear a rustling in the leaves, and here's this big, Chelonianis rugosa, walking through, because they get up and they move from areas to areas to areas. And that was the first time I saw, my first Australian, turtle is, middle of the night going out to go pee. I was not expecting to see it, a big, snake-necked turtle, walking through, headed to the river. That was really wild.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, Australia is a whole different game. We talked to some Australian turtle biologists and keepers in the past, and there's a lot of cool stuff from you don't hear as much about, I feel like, if you're focused more on North American turtles and such. But that's a cool story for sure. Maybe you've also done some work, I think, in West Africa, or at least were co-author on a paper that was pretty interesting on sort of community ecology. It was maybe what was that like?
Well, that's an interesting one. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go and do the field work. This was a young man who reached out to me. Much like y'all did. You sent me an email, and he was explaining to me what he wanted to do and how he was trying to write this grant, and he had never written a grant. And I said, I'll help you write the grant, because I used to be awful at it. I mean, I did. Oh gosh, graduate school, I tried to write so many grants. I never got funded. I was awful. And so I said, okay, I'll mentor you on this, and I'll help you, and I'll help you get the grant. I'll help design the study, and I'll do whatever I can. And we corresponded back and forth for like 2 years, working on the writing and getting permits, and I was a reference for a lot of that. And I was thrilled when he got the money. I think that money was from Rutherford, I believe it was. He got the money, and he was doing the field work, and we were just corresponding back and forth, and we were talking about it. And then once he had the data, I was able to help analyze it for him. And I thought it was just a fabulous study, because he was out really looking for the turtles and trying to understand some of the community composition, because one of the areas that we're really lacking a lot of information is from Africa, because I think people forget just how big Africa is. It's huge. And there's a lot of turtle species there. And I think there's going to be a ton of newly described species from Africa, because we've really only just touched the surface. on it. And if you look at some of the distribution maps, they're so strange. You know, you got a spot over here separated, and you got another spot. You got this, you got that. And particularly now with the rise of much more advanced genetic analysis, where you can do whole genomes and stuff, I think we're going to see a lot of new species diversity new species being described in Africa. And I think that goes all back to this whole idea of capacity, and where we really need to invest. And one of the areas we really need to invest is in younger generations of people, and giving them not just the money to do it, but that mentorship and the capacity to do it, and helping them along the way, and often providing salary. And a lot of people are like, oh, why are you giving them salary? I don't want to fund someone's salary. It's absolutely necessary. And I've reviewed thousands of grants, and for a long time we can't fund salary, but it's essential. It's essential in countries where it's not a hobby. It's not something, oh, I've got a job here, and on my time off I can go study turtles. It's not like that. This is what they're doing, and this is and you have to pay them so that they can do the work, because if you're not paying them, they can't, then they're not going to be able to keep a roof over their head and have food and so forth. So I think we have to change our perception of that, and realize that we really do have to pay people. And we're not talking these huge salaries like what we have in the United States, or Europe. It's a very different pay scale. But that's, again, goes to how a small amount of money can make a big difference. In that they can do so much. And I really think Central and South Africa are some of the areas where just the biggest areas of growth. I love Pelusi's. I think they're neat. They're smelly little brown turtles, but I think they're fabulous. And there's so much difference. Like, you look at Pelusius cupulata. Everyone got that confused with Gabonensis for a long time. And cupulata's just got this little tiny distribution, the Ivory Coast, maybe part of Ghana and stuff. And it got hit hard by a lot of pet trade in the past few years. And you're like, well, what's going on? And we don't have the slightest idea of what their population structure is, how it's doing, what's its true distribution. I mean, we take for granted that we can open a field guide and go, oh yeah, okay, that's where they are. Or you look at John Iverson's great work, where he did some of those first world checklists, where he took up all those museum specimens and mapped them out. I mean, that's an immense project. And now it's become the check, all integrated in the specialist groups checklist that's put out here, and you have all these great maps, and you can look at these maps and you go, this is the historical distribution of these turtles, and you get an idea of where they are. We take that for granted, but I think as being North American biologist, because there's been so much stuff. Like, if you look at iNaturalist, that's a neat one too. And like you say, okay, I'm going to go look at some of these distributions of, say, Terrapini in Mexico. There's all these sorts of things. Well, we just don't have those sorts of capacities in Africa. And I think that's a real challenge, and it's something I would really like to spend more time on, is really kind of developing those and really doing some of those broad surveys. And my good friend Phil Allman, he's been going to Ghana a lot. He mostly works with sea turtles. That's his true love. But he's got several looking at hingeback tortoises and trying to find out some of these distributions and populations of hingeback turtles. But what he was finding is, whenever he found populations, they were mostly smaller individuals, because the large individuals have been captured and sold into the pet trade or eaten in the bushmeat trade. So there's a whole other realm of things we could be doing in Africa, and it is so huge. And I guess if I was making recommendations for younger folks, is to consider doing some work in Africa. Maybe learn some French. Yeah, my French is horrible. But I think there's some real important stuff that's going on, like in Africa. You look at pancake tortoises, you know, Tanzania, Kenya, the amount that are between like 2016 and 2019 that were exported from Zambia. Was it Zambia or Zimbabwe? Maybe it was Zimbabwe. It's like it's astronomical, thousands and thousands and thousands of them going into the pet trade, and that's another one that it's been really impacted by the pet trade, and we know of a few protected populations, but we haven't had the chance to really look at a range-wide population study. But we do know that on our current assumptions of turtle biology, that the rate they were being collected was just too much. And they went on CITES Appendix 1, which means there's no commercial trade. And we're hoping that will help reduce the trade. And that's something else I've worked on. I know, sorry, this is getting a little off, but I get a lot of flack from people about CITES because I've been involved in some of the things. And and I grew up keeping turtles. Keeping turtles was extraordinarily important to me, and I think there is a real value to having pet turtles. If I didn't have those pet turtles, I don't think I would be where I am today. But unfortunately, we've seen with globalization and the internet is that the booming pet trade is increasing to such a level, and it's just, with many species, it's just beyond sustainable, and that's unfortunate because I think there are many people who are responsible turtle keepers and turtle breeders, and they really want to do the best for turtles. But like when you have 20,000 Podonemus unifilis shipped out from South America to the pet trade markets in China, those numbers are huge, and unfortunately, I think a lot of those turtles are just going to die, and that's really, really unfortunate. So, I think I'm sorry, I was being rather circuitous. I think as a community, we really have to look at policing ourselves, and like when you see turtles for sale in the U.S. and they didn't come in legally, you really shouldn't buy them, even though it's perfectly legal for you to buy them because they've already come into the United States. But you're supporting illegal trafficking of wildlife, and I think if you really, really care for wildlife, no matter you really can't buy those wild caught turtles that were smuggled into the U.S. And that I think that's really hard for some people because they want to do the best with the turtles. Like I don't remember a few years ago when all those Mexican box turtles were coming into the U.S. and I was approached by several people who are love turtles heart and soul, and they were like, "Oh, I don't want them to die. I should buy them, and we can try to build some colonies and stuff." And I'm like, they came in illegally, and you shouldn't buy them because you're just going to continue to support this trade and make it more profitable. And we've seen that over and over again with like rare turtles, like Kinosternon cora and Kinosternon voti that were just described. Very small populations. Voti particularly very small, just near Puerto Vallarta. Even before it was described, a few photos were circulated, and within months they were showing up in markets in Italy and Japan. And there's a drive by many collectors to have the new species, the different species. I mean, one of the species I've been working on in Indonesia is a classic example. It's the Chelonianis McCordi, McCord's snake-necked turtle from the island of Roti. It's not a remarkable turtle in the sense it's a beautiful turtle. It's a turtle I really like, but it's a brown snake-necked turtle. It's not beautiful yellows and reds and oranges and stripes and colorations. It's not that. But at the height of the demand they were selling for like $5,000 a piece. There was just incredible demand, and that turtle got hit by like the double, triple whammy. It's from a very small little island off the coast of Timor. It was only found in about 13, 15 lakes, small lakes, and there had been collection pressure for quite a while for wildlife but everyone just thought it was one of the more common side necks. So we would go, to the markets and be sold in the wild animal trade. But when it was described as a new species, the demand went skyrocketed. So everyone went down to the river and went down to the lakes and caught as many as they can, because they were all of a sudden worth something. Before, they were just a pest, and people didn't like them when they were fishing, and they were like, I don't like these turtles. They steal my bait. But the prices went really high. So all these adults were captured. And and everyone's like, oh man, that's really bad. But they can't be extinct. We remove some adults, there's got to be juveniles. Well, in doing all my surveys, what we found was that, in the 60s, maybe early 70s, the predatory fish, the snakehead fish, was introduced into those lakes by the government as a part of a means for creating more protein source for the people. And it's likely that those snakeheads, which are incredibly prolific and just they're just, oh man, they're like just like little sharks. They eat everything. They probably ate all the juveniles, just wiped them all out. So you had huge pet trade demand that took off most of the adults. The juveniles were probably consumed by an invasive predator. You have a small distribution of only a few lakes. And then all of a sudden you have land use changes and climate change. And now you're down to like 2 lakes that have water year round that are suitable for the return of the turtles. And one has snakeheads and one doesn't. So we've been working on this like snakehead reduction program, but we're probably never going to get rid of the snakeheads. They're just too abundant and too prolific. So with that lake, we're probably always going to have to be managing it. We're always probably going to have to be releasing turtles that are too big for the fish to swallow. And they're extinct in the wild. They're gone. And I know the specialist group, they're considered possibly extinct in the wild. But we've done extensive surveys, and all the villagers said the last time they saw any was well over a decade ago. That's the last time. And I went out and I met the main hunter trapper guy who collected most of the turtles for export, and he gave us all this incredible information about where he caught turtles, how many turtles he caught from each lake, and he spent a lot of time with us out trapping for turtles. And he realizes that, he didn't know that they were unique to the island. He just was trying to make a living. And he's not a rich man by any means. He's not a rich man. And now he really wants to work on bringing the turtles back. And he feels like that's his next mission in life to do, is to help bring the turtles back. But when we start looking at recovering turtle populations, I'm not even sure what we were talking about Africa. I'm talking about Indonesia. But again, that's the important part. It's about finding those people. And if you look at where conservation programs are most successful and where we've really had leaps and bounds, it's when we have champions. You look at Kalayard, Steve Platt in Myanmar. You look at Sita Sam in Cambodia. You look at Shailendra Singh in India. Camila Ferreira in Brazil, Herman in Colombia. These are the people that really champion the turtles. And I think we have to realize that as North Americans, that fly in and fly out conservation just doesn't work. You have to have the capacity on the ground. And the best way that we can improve conservation is investing in people and giving them the resources and the logistics and all the help that they need so that they can do the job. So that's my soapbox.
And that's so interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that got really long-winded. So, but yeah, as you see, it's all kind of connected.
Right. That's how we like it. I think it's just kind of take it wherever. Right. It just certain questions bring up just a plethora of different experiences. I think it's a really interesting thing. But it's cool how much that you're sort of bringing people into conservation. It's maybe something we don't necessarily think about as much. But yeah, right. If you're going to make a project that is sustaining in a different place, that you really have to get the people from that place involved in order to make an impact. It's a simple thing, but I feel like a lot of times we don't really think about that from the control room. Maybe if that's probably not the right way to say it, but it sort of, from our perspective here in North America, things are relatively good, and we sort of say, oh, we can do a lot of these things, but we really have to invest in other people, right? That's really
it is an American attitude, and it's something that I learned on my first trip to India, because I was like, I've caught turtles around the world. I can do this. I can come in and I can make a change. And I was smacked upside the face by the cultural differences and the number of people and here I am. I'm an overweight guy. I just flew in on a very expensive plane ticket. I got a laptop computer. I've got a really nice camera. I got really nice clothes, nice boots, and I'm showing up, and I'm the telling them don't eat the turtles. I'm wealthy beyond comparison to them. They could never imagine, having enough money to do what I just did, to come over and look at a turtle. So we have to really put that into perspective. It is a very much a kind of this thing that Americans, we have to often think we can just fix it, and we can go in and we can do it, and we can do it quickly. And I think we have to kind of check some of our assumptions and some of our cultural biases, at the door when we look at that, because far too often I've gone into places and I've met with villagers, and I'm not the first person to come there to want to study turtles. And they talk about how they were really angry at the last person that was there because they didn't really involve them. They didn't talk to their elders. They didn't work with their communities. They didn't abide by some of the community laws and standards. And I think that's the toughest thing, because for my postdoc, I was supposed to gain a ton of data to publish it. That was my goal, was to get a bunch of data and publish it, because that's the currency in academia, publications. And I was distraught after my first 3 or 4 months there, because I wasn't collecting a lot of data. And I think that's when I really, really realized that conservation is different. And in that sense is that, we can do conservation science, but conservation true action sometimes goes at a slower pace than we want. And that can be really frustrating for a lot of people, in that, you have to kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit. And, we're in an interesting stage, because, 20 years ago, we thought we were going to lose dozens of species. We thought species were just going to blink out. We were going to lose so many species. But there's been just an incredible outpouring of folks, and we've kind of stopped it on a lot of the things, but the populations are still small. And now we're entering this new phase, which I think is the most exciting phase, is recovering these populations and putting turtles back into the wild and working with some of this population recovery. But before I go on, I wanted to touch on one of your other aspects that you were talking about. I recently published a report on conservation priorities within South and Southeast Asia, and I published that with ASAP, which is the Asian Species Action Partnership. In 2011, we had a meeting in Singapore. It was a big meeting. It was a very big meeting. We brought people in from all over the world, and we were talking about Asian turtles. And myself, Andrew Wald, and Colin Poole, we wrote up the findings of that, and we made a 10-year plan. And we wrote it, and nice, pretty colored pictures, and we published it in a hard copy. And there's still some hard copies floating around. And I felt really great about that. That was one of the really things. Well, went back. I've had a couple more workshops, a couple more red listing things, and so ASAP approached me about doing 10 years on, another, how are we looking at things retrospectively after 10 years? I said, sure, let's do it. That's really interesting. So I did. And a lot of that information was taken from, these workshops for red listing, and also a ton of reaching out and talking to people in the field who are doing the work, and just the years of gathering data, years of reading grant proposals, and so forth. So we had a lot of information. And, myself, Andrew, and Colin, we wrote it up and we put it together and we had it edited, and I went to the designer and they had all the pictures and everything like that. I was really proud. And I put it out on the specialist groups listserv. Here's a copy for everyone. And it's on ResearchGate under, my profile and stuff. And I thought this was a really neat thing. And I was really hoping it would generate more thought, more discussion, and it would help funding organizations, and it would help country programs and researchers and all these other people to look at what was going on. And for the most part, I got really positive comments, but I got one comment from someone in Vietnam, and he was like, "This is great, but why aren't there more Asians involved, Asian people?" And I was like, "Oh." and I said, well, there were so many people I met and talked with, they all put into it, and I just accumulated the information. It wasn't me coming up out of the vacuum for it. But looking back, I probably should have had more co-authors, and that's sort of this problem is that when you're creating these big documents and you bring in a ton of different co-authors, it can be quite cumbersome, quite difficult. But again, going back to the people, I'm very privileged in that I've been able to go to all these different countries and do all these things, and that's what's allowed me to accumulate and process and synthesize this information. But we haven't been able to afford those privileges to many people living in the area. And I think that's something we need to do better. We need to do better at. We need to have more regional conferences. And I would like to see organizations like the TSA and other organizations like the Turtle Conservancy and so forth really focus on some regional meetings and helping fund those regional meetings so that we can have more people who are able to have that broader perspective. And that's a different type of capacity. But I think if we're really going to have progress, it's something we need to do. And we're I remember having to actually type out letters to people. I'm that old, and now we're sending stuff, on WhatsApp and Messenger and Skype and all these other things, and we're communicating at such a rapid pace. But there's really is something about actually being in a room, sitting down over dinner or drinks or whatnot, and really having these long discussions that really helps build that capacity. And we have to move away from only a select few with the privilege who've been able to go abroad and do all of this, to letting more and more people have that perspective, because I think that perspective is key to advancing turtle conservation.
That's an interesting, really, I think, yeah, right. The capacity building and the meetings they're fun too, right? People want to come to that and listen to presentations, and it can inspire maybe some people that are just getting into conservation. It's something that, at least for me, the TSA was kind of like that in 2017. I'd always been interested in turtles, but went to one of the meetings and was like, yeah, this is definitely something I'd like to. So, I mean, yeah, that's something for, right. If we had more meetings going on in different places, we could have situations like that, and kind of, yeah, a different type of capacity building. It's a good thing, I think. Maybe we can switch and talk a little bit. We're starting to get up on time here, but just a little bit about, I believe the thesis that you did, it was pretty interesting. Kind of you kind of highlighted the difference between the embryonic diapause and aestivation. It was kind of an interesting thing that folks may not even really realize is something. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, sure. This is kind of neat. So, when I was in high school, I went to a reptile importer's place, and he had these two turtles that I had no idea what they were. So I bought them. I was 16 at the time, and They were Acanthopheles pallidi pectoris, the Chaco side-neck turtle, little brown turtle. Never didn't know what they were. And I had been real lucky is like you, I'd reached out to other people, and Carl Ernst was up at George Mason University. So I wrote to him. I said, hey, I've got these turtles. I'd really like to talk to you about them. He goes, oh, bring them up. So I brought him up, and he took 5 rolls of pictures, 5 camera film rolls of pictures. And, that was, late 80s. That's when film was expensive. And I was like, who takes 5 rolls of photos from one turtle? This is crazy. And he really wanted them. He was like, I want them, And I was like, no, I want to keep them. And he goes, okay, if you ever decide to get rid of them, you call me and, stuff. And so I was like, wow, these are cool. What's going on? And every year I would get eggs, and I would do what you normally do. I take the egg and put it in the incubator, and I would like wait for it to develop, and nothing ever happened. So I started diving into the literature, really looking, and I came across some of Mike Ebert's papers, and he was talking about this thing called embryonic diapause. I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. So Mike and I started talking, had some great conversations about it. And this is all early. We didn't even know about the chilling eggs and all this other stuff. And so I was collecting the data, and I was very lucky to have an incredible mentor when I went to Virginia Tech. It was Robin Andrews. She's mostly a lizard ecologist, studied anolis lizards and did some amazing stuff. And she helped me write my first publication from the data I collected in high school. And that went to her review. And I was so proud, beating my chest. But then I went off and did a master's, and I was studying map turtles. But I really wanted to figure out what the heck was going on with these turtles. Why couldn't I get these turtle eggs to hatch? And that led me to talking to a number of people. And I wanted to go to Argentina. I wanted to study these turtles in Argentina. And Carl looked at me and goes, no, it's too hard. It's too far. You got to get the data to write your dissertation. Don't study that. Because talk to Mike Ewart. I was talking to Mike, and we were talking about what species to study. And he thought Tortoises tripricatus, because they have big clutches, they have a diapause, and we could, you could do some split clutch studies and stuff. So I flew down to Mexico, and I met up with Dick Vogt. And we went out, and we had this population of Tortoises, and we were catching like 25 a day, real big, honker, massive Tortoises. They're the big giant muscle, just huge, just absolutely awesome turtles. And I was so thrilled. I'm like, this is what I'm going to study. This is where I'm going to study that. I'm going to buy a little house in this village. Everything's set. I come back next year, and every single turtle in that river system had been caught, eaten, gone. I was heartbroken. Just oh, what am I going to do? This is what I was going to do. And I called Mike, and I talked to Dick, and they were like, well, why don't you study chelonians? Let's look at the mud turtles. They're smaller clutch, but they've got an interesting stuff, and there's a little bit of literature, and you can look at stuff across different species and just different geographics. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to go look at Chelonians sorenensis in Arizona. And I was like, that's not going to work. I want to go back down to Mexico. I love New Mexico because I've spent a ton of my life in Central America. My first trip abroad was to Costa Rica when I was right out of high school, and I went down and studying sea turtles and catching rhinochelonians. Just absolutely loved it. So I was like, okay, I'll study chelonians. So I was doing it on in Mexico, and Dick had left for his position in Brazil, and there was a field station in Los Tuxtlas, and this was in central Veracruz, Mexico, and the field station is run by the University of Mexico in Mexico City. So I had a place to stay, and there was a lake with turtles. I knew I wanted to get a lot of eggs, and I wanted to just do some of the basic. I wanted to incubate them and do some manipulations and look at what was going on. And so I really dove into it. And basically what we were seeing is that there's 2 types of turtle reproductions. There's a 1 and 2. And this is John Legler and Ed Malk really published on this first. There's a type that, come out of the river, they lay on a sandy bank, eggs develop rapidly, boom, they're out. And that's it. They have this defined nesting period. Whereas you have a lot of tropical turtles that can be smaller. They lay smaller clutches, but they lay a lot more clutches, and they have it over an extended period. So let's say they start nesting in August, October, November, and they'll nest all the way through into January, March, April, and that's when the rainy season starts again. So there's this big circle. But what I was able to see is that with embryonic diapause, there was this delayed developmental period where the embryos were in a rest, and they all came to about the same point in time, and that's when they all developed at about the same point in time, so they were ready to hatch when the conditions for the hatchling were appropriate for them to survive once they hatched. And I loved it. I got to play with a lot of turtle eggs and did a lot of candling and looking at stuff, and I got into looking at some of the lipid layers and how, female sequestering yolk inside the egg is so important for turtles in their first year of growth and all these sorts of things. And I nerded out, but it's an interesting part of aspect of it. And if you look at turtles in general and you look at all the different turtles, embryonic diapause is so much more common than what we considered. So many people have just looked at turtle biology in the kind of the North American, European sense. They've looked at river turtles or so forth, and they lay their eggs, rapid development, and they get out. But if we're going to be doing turtle conservation on a lot of these subtropical and tropical species, there is a delayed development, and we have to understand that delayed development if we're going to be doing real hands-on manipulative conservation. But it also allows us to get a little bit better understanding of their status and how the populations can grow, because you have a little mud turtle that lays 2 to 3 eggs at a time, but might lay 5 to 6 clutches. That's what's really cool, is it's able to put all those things and they all hatch at about the same time. So everyone's like, oh, how does a little turtle that only lays a couple eggs maybe once or twice a year work? But no, they lay multiple clutches more frequently, and they're really putting their eggs out there. And there's some other theories like bed hedging theories and all this other stuff that can go into. But it's just a very interesting physiology aspect of turtles, and we see it more and more. And there's also there's an aestivation that some, like Kinesternus sorenensis, they rapidly go through development and they sit in the egg and they aestivate in the egg towards the end and wait for the rains to come. You look at Cretochilles and Sculptor, the pig nose, those kind of hatch when the eggs get completely, inundated, and then they pop out of the egg in the water. That's like when Rod Kennett was publishing that stuff on the Chelodina and the nesting underwater. That was crazy. You look at Dermatimes, they barely come out of the water. They kind of nest in kind of a little right next to the edge of the water, and those eggs could survive inundation. Hardella, that was a species that people struggled to figure out how to incubate, and it's got a crazy diapause. But oftentimes those have to sit in the water for weeks before they'll start developing once they're removed. There's some really crazy turtle incubation stuff that we're just trying to understand and go on. And so, again, a turtle is not when everyone says a turtle is a turtle is a turtle. No, it's not. There's some very big differences, and that all plays into how we do conservation. So I can go on and on and on about it because it's so fascinating. Like you look at Orlidia borneensis, that's the largest hard-shell turtle, in Southeast Asia. They're massive. They're big turtles, huge heads and stuff. We don't have a single population of those under protection, and we really don't know much at all. There's only a couple remarks about where they nest. Everyone's like, oh, they nest in piles of rotting vegetation. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, they're in some peat swamp, so they got to come up and nest. But what's really going on, and how does that work? And again, it's really hard for people to go study them because the populations are so low, and you've got to try to find that individual population. But you don't want to let too many people know, because then they'll be hunted out, like that population of Tripercatus that I was trying to study. So yeah, it's interesting. And one other, this is a cool one, and I'll leave it at that. Platymis platycephala. Have you guys ever looked into the literature about them? There's an old paper by, I think it was BB. I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and look. that showed they had a triploid diploid mosaicism.
Yeah, I've seen this before. Yeah.
Yeah, and no one's really looked into that. I mean, we know about this type of chromosome stuff in fishes, and it's what we see is some type of parthenogenesis or ability to change sexes and what's going on, and no one's really followed up on that, and no one has really kind of figured out where that population of turtles, because he got those turtles from the pet trade, and some of the other populations that people have studied haven't had that. So is it just, I think they were thinking it was French Guiana that the turtles came from. But if there's a student that really wants to do a cool project, go find that population and figure out what the heck they're doing. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I was talking to a few weeks back a researcher doing work with the gnoles, and he has a tetraploid gnoles, although they were hybrid crosses. So I guess
Cubans.
No, I forget the exact species, but it was something along the line. I don't remember the species.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing. It's just kind of a cool comparison there. But yeah, no, that I've come across that paper before, and yeah, it's sort of odd that there wasn't any sort of follow up to that. It seems like something that's worth investigating.
Yeah, I dreamed about that one, but I haven't been able to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I have one more question concerning the sort of diapause. You said it's sort of an environmental adaptation, but when it comes to actually working with certain species, it's impossible to incubate them effectively if you don't put them through that aestivation or diapause. So is that, I guess maybe if it was an adaptation many eons, millions of years ago, it's become ingrained to the point where it's necessary. Is it still 100% in response to the environment, or is there some level of just this is how it works, right?
Well, it's interesting. Okay, so in insects, which is diapause has been most studied in, there's a hormone that's produced, and it's really related to light cycle. And it's in mammals. It's part of the pituitary gland, because there's all types of things like in mammals where you have delayed implantation, and there's all kinds of different forms of arrested embryonic development. But in turtles, what I've always would like to do is to have a controlled study where you have turtles under different light cycles and seeing how that impacts the amount of diapause the turtles have. That's my hunch. And I think that, for a lot of people who are keeping turtles, we often don't pay quite as much attention to light cycles. And I think that's really important. I've got several friends who have been trying to hatch Phrynops williamsi eggs and haven't been successful in trying to hatch those. They get eggs every year, but they never hatch. So that's the question of, okay, what's going on with the diapause? Why do we have to cool them to temperatures that are pretty extreme, sometimes outside of what you would normally see in the wild, much lower? Well, there's a lot going on in soil physics. And one of the aspects that we haven't really investigated is soil salinity. And hey, turn the TV down. The soil salinity. Yeah, the kids are watching cartoons. Because soil salinity changes throughout the year, and it has an impact on the osmosis, the water transfer, and the water vapor going through. So I've been very curious about how that impacts the eggs, and I think we haven't really looked into that. We look at like the acidity of different eggs, like how acidic the nesting incubation medium is, and how changing acidity can also be an environmental cue. Because when the turtles lay their eggs and the embryos are arrested, they're in the late gastrulus stage, that's still under maternal genetic control. That embryo has not developed its own control of its genetics. It's all based on what's going on from the maternal influence. So if we look at what's going on maternally and investigate that, Then we pair that with what we're seeing in the soil, and we're in the infancy. We've really been focusing on just the variable on moisture and temperature, but there's so much else going on in the soil: pH, salinity, oxygen transfer, those sorts of things. And if you start looking at water potential, which is measured in kilopascals, and how those water molecules move within the soil particles, and how those soil particles can be created from evaporation, and that it's a water vapor, and sometimes water vapor doesn't have all of the salinity, it can be influenced by the pH, but there's seasonal changes in that, and I think that's a whole big area of investigation. And if I was still had a chance to go back to Mexico and study those turtles some more, I would try a lot more manipulations to see if we can get to some of those answers. Can you trick it? Because as you know, captive husbandry and zoos and everything like that, you wanted to skip the diapause and really get into the development and hatch quickly, and you want to hatch a turtle that has the most yolk reserves, because most yolk reserves mean they're going to usually grow the most. So we have to really look into those aspects. Did I answer your question, or was that just totally too far off the deep end?
No, I think it does, in terms of highlighting the fact that, looking at all of the sort of the interplay between maternal influence, but also environment, and how that influences sort of embryological evolution, I guess. There's a lot of opportunity there, and it's kind of an interesting dynamic. You've got something that's not sort of freed from influence from the thing in which it came, in an environment that's also influencing that simultaneously. It's kind of an interesting sort of dynamic to think about.
Yeah, because there's, if you look at annual fish, like annual killifish, these are populations of fish. They lay their eggs in small forest ponds. The pond's completely dry. The eggs are in a state of embryonic arrest, and they wait for the next rain. Those are heavily influenced by soil dynamics, by the amount of peat or rotting vegetation or whatnot in there. And you think about that, if they're laying eggs in rotting vegetation, you've got methane, very little oxygen. So how do soil gases play into these these incubation periods? Because a lot of soils produce a lot of methane, and that's a lot of gases that are coming out. Is that some of the things that we need to start looking at if we're going to start breaking these diapauses, or really understanding the things? Because I've tried incubating all kinds of different substrates and different materials, and usually for me, if I incubate on like really gooey, like decomposing, like water hyacinth, that's degrading rapidly. You can produce heat in that sense, like when it's composting, so it's producing heat, but it's also very low oxygen. It can become anaerobic. So there's a ton of interesting stuff with soil science, and I do have to say that I got really interested in it because my PhD advisor, Willem Rosenberg at Ohio, when I said I wanted to study this, he handed me this big, fat, thick book, and it was all soil physics, and he goes, "Go read this and come back to me." So, I was not a good physics student. Oh no, I wasn't a good physics student. But I wish I had applied myself a bit more in physics so that I could understand what was really going on in soils. So it's another great topic for young biologists, is to really try to figure out what the heck is going on. Because we study stuff in sand, and sand is, water vapor moves through sand very easily. But if you start looking, we know that clays are really bad for incubating eggs because it tends to, my dog just got the zoomies, it blocks the pores and there's no oxygen transfer. But turtles don't always nest in sand. They don't nest in clay. They have all these variety of different nesting substrates. So I think that would be a really fascinating, bigger, broader study for someone to dive into for dissertation work.
An important work too. We're at the Turtle Conservancy. They've been pulling out eggs kind of left and right, and it seems like there's a lot to how do we most effectively this is just one example, but yeah, you're talking about work and sort of ex-situ work in all these different countries. How do we really maximize for every species is an interesting thing. And then Jason, I think, has a connection too to that, or sort of in the Ohio area. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, I was at OU in Athens for almost 8 years. I was there for a while. I was going back and forth to Mexico, and it was a neat place to live. Axel, please take Charlotte outside. I'm on the phone.
Working on online this year. Well, I think we can start to wrap things up. We try to keep things to an hour and 30. We could all, I think, talk for the entire day, but
easily.
But we also do something. I actually forgot to mention this. It's fine if this is too on the spot, but we do a little trivia at the end.
Okay.
Trivia. So if you want to, I don't know if you've got like 2 or 3 kind of obscure turtle facts that kind of on your mind, but if you want to just hit us with a few obscure turtle trivia questions, we can. We like the little game's kind of fun, I guess.
Okay. What turtle genus has the most vertebral scutes?
Oh, that's okay. Well,
I'll give you some hints. Southeast Asian.
Notocheles.
Yeah, Notocheles. It's a monotypic genus. It has 7 vertebral scutes. Very good. Very good. That's a really cool turtle that we don't know much at all about. It's kind of like it's a lot like Leucocephalon and Sulawesi. So stream dwelling turtle. I got fascinated in that turtle because when I was your age, I was in high school and I saw a price list for reptiles and it said purple turtle. And I was like, what the hell is a purple turtle? And they do have a little bit of a purple tint. I think it's from some of the cyanobacteria that grow on them, but very, very, very cool turtle. And one incredibly worthy of a study. And you can find them in Singapore. So if you can afford Singapore, that would be a great place to study Notocheles.
That's a cool one. Any other?
Let me think. That's one of my favorite ones.
It's tough to come up with one.
No, okay. What turtle has the longest known incubation?
I got this one too, but we can.
You think you got it?
I think I've got it. Yeah.
All right, well, hit me with it.
Go with it. I'll see if it's the same one I'm thinking.
Cheloniac expansa, 648 days, I think.
Yep, it's that. There's some debate between that and Longicollis.
Okay. Yeah. What was the longest Longicollis?
I'm trying to remember. I have to go back and read my dissertation. I think I had it in there. Oh man. I'm trying to think of some other good ones right off the top of my head. I was thinking about Claudius and stuff. Claudius is such a crazy turtle. Which Kenosternon has the smallest annual activity period?
Oh man.
I gave you Kenosternon. That's easy enough. And I'm talking about Mexico. So which one in Mexico has the shortest activity period? Well, right now I think it's Acutum. Acutum is a really interesting one. So you've got the rivers that kind of go through the wetlands, and then you have that natural little berm, and then it goes into like a flat area, which are oftentimes wetlands on their own. Well, Acutum is in that thin strip of forested habitat along the rivers. And we were seeing activity periods of about 2 months a year.
Oh, geez.
Wow. The rest of the time, they're buried under the dirt. And they're tiny and they're cute as all get out. And, that's interesting. Like with Claudius has a little bit longer. He's probably 3 or 4 months while the wetlands still have water. But, you see these obese Claudius in collections because they just feed them year round. They don't let them estivate because they spend a ton of their time estivating. And we're in they're going to give me in water all year. This is going to be perfect. And we're going to keep them and we're going to feed them because it's fun to watch them eat. But yeah, they have these long periods of time where they're not active. I like what's the Caledonian in Australia, Western Australia, perfectly round. I can't believe I'm forgetting the name.
The sandstone, Steindacheri.
Standacheri. That's another one. I mean, talk to Sean Duty. He'll tell you stories about going out, and those things have incredibly short activity periods. And that's the one that's really high on my bucket list to go see. I saw one when I was, a teenager for sale, and it was astronomically more money than I had as a teenager. But I did get to see it, and I got a couple photographs. That's the only one I've ever seen, and I'm dying to get back to Australia to go see that one and really look at what the heck it's doing, because it's an unturtle turtle, and I think those are what I'm really been interested in the latter part of my career, is looking at these turtles that just don't fit the norm.
I like that phrase, unturtle turtle.
Yeah, look at this. So this is a Borneoensis.
I noticed that right away.
Yeah. So you see the big fossa here, and the local name is Tokum, because they come up when this is a male, when the female's nest, they get up and they go bang 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 bang.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, well, they're like, oh, they're stuff. But these, I would love someone to do like some physics, because these, this is just a thin bit of scutes that are over here. What purpose are these? Is this a means for them to hear long distances? Because we know turtles are talking, but is there other types of drumming or other things? Because there are other turtles that have these. Mostly it's just in juveniles, but in this species it's really pronounced. So if there could be someone who had the physics and understanding of bioacoustics and so forth, and try to really kind of model what's going on, and are these related to perceiving the sounds, I would be really fascinated. Or are these guys using it somehow to make sounds? Are they somehow internally drumming? I don't know. I just think it's fascinating. Or maybe it's just a holdover, from early development. Who knows? I mean, I think we're kind of hoping that it's something really interesting and something cool, but it could just be, just evolutionary constraint. But I would, if I had 1 million years to live, I would dive into that study too.
It looks like the biggest females are fully ossified, though. There's no gaps left there. So
yeah,
perhaps,
yeah. It seems to be mostly in the males that I've seen the most, but the females tend to have it a little bit smaller. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was saying if there was some sort of function to it, like communication wise, then maybe it would be something more between males, or if the females are fully ossified, then they wouldn't be capable of some sort of communication, or like assuming that those gaps would provide that.
Well, you've seen how these guys are so diachromatic, and that there's seasonal changes in their coloring, and they probably have the most seasonal changes in their coloring. But you look at Batagur cachuga, you look at Batagur trivictata. When the males are in breeding season, they develop these incredible bright colors. So, I think this is about female sex selection. They're picking the males that have the most vibrant colors. And what we saw in captivity was, oftentimes, if you got one male with one female, the females just wouldn't mate. But if you put 5 or 6 males in it, and the males are beating up on each other, and you would get this one where he's the the ruler of the roost, and he gets this bright colors. He was the one that was mating with the females. So it's this idea of this female. So perhaps the males are doing something where they're using this to make a sound or hear a sound, and it's part of some kind of male combat. Or maybe it's the males trying to pick up on female sounds, because males tend to move around a great deal more than the female. So maybe they're trying to use it to find the females to where to go mate, or maybe they're just using it to hear other sounds of other turtles, to congregate. Because years and years ago, when I was studying the Lepidopteris olivaceae, for the big Aerobatus, we were trying to understand, how did they all come to one little tiny beach? How did they come from all over the ocean and come here? So we were talking about pheromones and hormones, and trying to understand this whole natal homing and what was going on. But, it wasn't really until we realized that they're probably communicating some type of vocalizations that travel so far in water, and that's how they're congregating. It's a whole other area of social sciences, because I remember in college when I was taking, animal behavioral biology, turtles weren't in that at all. Turtles don't have any social structure. They don't have any real interesting behaviors. So I think we're at that kind of that real tip of the iceberg and can really start to come up and try to understand that. And that's important again for conservation, because think about it, we're doing all these head starting and we're raising turtles in captivity. Are we disrupting some of those social learning processes, some of these communications? We don't know. So it's something to consider when we're doing these management practices, to assure that we're not screwing up some of the natural processes. We just don't know, because we don't know what they are.
All right. I mean, I think that's it. You want to say something?
Now, right when I'm getting excited and talking about cool stories, you cut me off.
Like, it would make perfect sense for there to be long-term auditory communication between sea turtles. Like, if that kind of distance is involved, how could they communicate any other way? Like,
yeah. It totally makes sense. I know there's been several studies on their ears and looking at sound perception, but it also makes sense if you have a big shell. It's a big drum, and you're able to probably pick up a lot more stuff. So I'm just curious about it. I've never been one much for acoustics, but it would be just fascinating if someone could dive into that. I would be thrilled to see a type of research.
The sound waves, it was like an overview that was written by someone who had done work with turtle sound perception and ears, and I think it was one of the Radiata journal, one of the magazine.
Okay. Yeah.
And he actually talks about some work that was done, I think in the 80s, that showed that there are sound receptors in the shells of turtles. Not in your typical, not like those that are present in the ear. I don't know the specifics behind the differentiation.
If you find that, send it to me. I'd love to read it.
Yeah, I can find it again. It's kind of an interesting thing. I forget the specifics, but yeah, it says that they can perceive low frequencies through the shell. So certainly what you're saying with that actually modulates the sound wave to some extent, probably, but they can also perceive the sound in probably a way that's not comprehensible to humans, but
like sort of like how elephants can, they pick up their toes and they put their toes on the ground to hear those ultra low frequencies.
Something like that. It was still kind of debated too. It was like, how effective are these? It was a while that I read it, but it was kind of an interesting thing. I can definitely send that to you. It was kind of.
And with your Menoria out there at the TC, are you hearing the vocalizations from your Menoria or the TC's Menoria?
I mean, I've come out here for the past like 6 years, and I've heard it before, but not in the past few weeks. No.
Oh yeah. Mine are making up a ton of noise right now. There's really something. They really do make a lot of noise.
Yeah, I have heard it. You can definitely hear that right when you walk in. But
I was in Colombia and we were doing some surveys for red-footed tortoises, and we were on this big ranch down on the border with Venezuela, in the kind of like the llanos, big wetland areas. And we were walking through these sand hills, and the way we were able to find the tortoises is we could hear the males mating, and you would hear that. I can't do it. It sounds sort of like a chicken. I don't even try to emulate it because it'll show up on TikTok. But that's the first time I've ever been able to walk through an area and just been out and be able to find turtles by just listening for the mating sounds. Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I think we can start to wrap things up. We've had a really fun conversation, I think, and I think we've all learned a lot. It's been.
Well, I hope I didn't drone on too much or stand too much on my soapbox. And we should have started with these fun questions in the beginning. I got all fired up.
Oh man, well, yeah, maybe we could start doing something. Yeah, but no, it's been really interesting, and I think it's a cool, actually enjoyable, that just kind of all over the place. It's honestly we just come on and want to talk turtles, and I think that we did that.
We accomplished that goal.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, well, thank you very much for inviting me. This has been a lot of fun, and it's been a fun way to start a Sunday morning.
Yeah,
Of course.
no, yep, same. Well, all right. So for, I guess, the viewers, you can find us at theturtleroom.org/CheloniaCast. We also have access to the Student Research Fund on there. And we will see you on the next installment. Goodbye.